Gather around, gals. It's story time. Welcome to Sobriety Snippets for Women Over 40, where we elevate our mindset and trade hangovers for higher consciousness, one powerful snippet at a time. I'm Becca Jacobson, and it is story time, Friday story time. Right now, we're running a little series here in Snippet Land called Radical Reinvention. And each Friday, I'm sharing one of the stories from my memoir that I wrote a few years back. And we're doing this not so I can tell you my story, but so that you can consider writing your own. And I'm choosing stories from my memoir that have different aspects to them that I want to talk to you about. So today, I'm going to share a story with you, and I want you to pay attention to the emotional intensity that the story carries. In other words, notice how much emotion I put into the story when I write it. That's what I'm trying to say. Because I learned a big lesson just by writing my stories sort of intuitively about how we feel about these stories. And I'm going to talk about that after I read you the story. So just enjoy the story. Not that it's really particularly happy story, but nonetheless. And just note how I wrote this emotionally charged story and how it actually came out. And we'll talk about that at the end. And then I will give you a journal prompt on how you can watch for that when you're writing your own stories. Okay, so it's story time, gals. Let's do this. Father-daughter lessons. There were 6 of us after my mom remarried, and it turned out I was the only one who stayed in high school until the end. And when I did, I was 17 and free. There it was, my life before me, mine to do what I wanted. And what I wanted was money. That's it. That's all I knew. Money was the key to everything, and without it, life was unbearable. I knew this because my mom had told me about it all my life. She always carefully reminded us that there wasn't enough money in the house, that we had to stop asking for things, and that we had to understand that money doesn't grow on trees. At the same time, she explained that if you could get money, you could have whatever you wanted. I knew how frustrating it was not to be able to do things I wanted to do, to not have new clothes to go back to school, to not bother to desire things because they were not going to come. I can hear Mom now saying, "We can't afford that. We're broke. Always make sure you get money because life is unbearable without it." And on and on. Well, I was going to get money. I left the small city I had grown up in and moved to Vancouver. My biological dad lived there, and he miraculously said I could stay with him for a while. I had a room in his condo. I was in the big city. I could do whatever I wanted. My life was before me, and making money was what mattered. Every day, I got the newspaper and looked for work. I knew I could waitress, but I wanted something more. Every day, I saw the same ad. Exotic dancers wanted, make $500 a week. And every day, I ignored it. But it haunted me. I imagined what I could do with $500 a week. I would be rich. Instead, I answered an ad to get on a team and learn how to earn a commission selling Kirby vacuum cleaners door to door. I did the 3-week training and learned how to sell door to door. I learned to target the elderly who were lonely and would let you in the door just to have someone to talk to. I learned how to carry that big, bulky vacuum around, bring it into the house, clean part of the living room, talk to the people and tell them how much happier they would be with a Kirby vacuum cleaner in their lives. It was hard work. The team of 5, 4 young men and me, would get in a van in the morning, load it up with vacuum cleaners, and drive around the city selling. I would be dropped off on a street or a trailer park with a partner and told to go to every house on the block. And that was what we did, knocking on door after door, trying to get into the houses. And finally, after a couple of weeks, I made a sale and earned a $300 commission. And I kept seeing the other ad in the newspaper the whole time. That $500 a week was still available. Then one day I showed it to my dad and he said, "Oh yeah, those girls make pretty good money and you could do it. If you want to see what it's like, I'll take you." I felt in that moment almost like we were a father-daughter team and he cared about me. Other than letting me stay with him temporarily, it was the only time he had taken me anywhere or done anything with me. That night, we went to a few local clubs. By then, I was 18 years old and the drinking age was 19, but I got in easily with my dad. I gotta admit, I was a bit shocked watching all those dancers take off everything, and at the end of their show, they would roll around on the floor with their legs in the air, showing off everything they had. I mean, everything. My dad laughed when he saw the look on my face, and he said, "Yep, if you're gonna do this, remember, it's not a titty show, it's a clitty show." And that was the only piece of advice my father ever gave me. In later years, I would stop and wonder what could have happened if, at that moment, he had advised me differently. And so I did it. I would become an exotic dancer on and off for the next 13 years. During that time, I also learned how to make money off stage. I learned a lot of things. And I tried every drug on the market. And I drank and drank and drank. I went to every party I was ever invited to, including spending more than one weekend with other girls at various Hells Angels clubhouses. The Hells Angels paid you good money if you made yourself available on demand and kept your mouth shut. And that's what I did because I knew it would keep me safe and give me money, drugs, and alcohol. My job gave me the opportunity to travel around, going from town to town for a week at a time, dancing, partying, and making money. Every now and then, some guy would hook me and start a relationship and try to get me to settle down, but it never lasted. And there was that time I got married, but that didn't interrupt my career because my husband liked having an independent wife. Over these 13 years, I would take time off and work for Mom or hang out for a few months trying to get sober, but I always ended up back at the bars. And when I came up for air, it was my 31st birthday. I was starting to have more and more trouble getting booked in clubs. There were a lot of 19-year-olds coming up the pike, and a 31-year-old who'd been around for over a decade was not the first choice. That's when I started thinking seriously about going to college, which everyone around me thought was hilarious. I'd thought about college since high school, always imagining what it would be like to have a bachelor's degree, but I had never mentioned it. No one in my family was educated, and I knew there was no money for college, and people in my family just didn't go to college. Sometimes, when I was in the right mood and had drank too much, I would mention it here and there. College, people around me would say, "Who the hell do you think you are? Just get a job at any of the clubs serving drinks. You'll still make good tips." And since I was still married, one night after several drinks, I even went so far as to dream out loud about one day getting a PhD. My husband, who was so amazingly supportive of my stripping and making little on the side, drew a heavy sigh and very quietly said, "I have no intention of being the doctor's husband." But I couldn't get the thought out of my head, and in 1998, when I was 32, free from my marriage and my first career, and fresh out of my 10th trip to the local detox center, I took my first college course. But that's another story. All right, gals. One of the things I want you to notice about this story, and actually all of the stories that I wrote, I didn't notice it when I was writing them, but when I went back and looked at them, and then when we decided, remember, these stories were first just journal entries. It was later I decided to put them together as a memoir. And when we started looking at them, what I noticed was the lack of emotion. This story is one example, but there are others, some I haven't shared yet, where it's an incredibly traumatic experience, right? To be honest, those entire 13 years were traumatic. However, I wrote the stories with very little emotion, a little, in fact, mostly sarcasm. And when I started noticing that, I realized it was a defense mechanism. And that's what we want to talk about today, gals. If you're writing your stories and you find yourself glossing over the difficulty, this is a defense mechanism, and it can be an important one. We don't want to go into an anxiety attack. We don't want to go into depression. We don't want to let our emotions and stories from the past make us spiral in any way. And that's one of the reasons we don't want to do this alone. Women in my world first learn how to manage their emotions, how to be with their emotions, how to allow their emotions safely. So when they do work like this, they're safe. So if you're doing this work, please be careful. But what we do want to look for is, are we glossing over the difficult moments? Are we avoiding language that brings us deep into the emotional charge behind the event? That's exactly what I did. I didn't know I was doing it until afterwards. So in this story and others that will come, you can pay attention to that. But more importantly, I want you to notice it in your own journaling. There is a journaling guide that comes along with this Radical Reinvention series. You'll find it in the show notes. Just tap the link. Whether you're using the guide or not, I am encouraging you to safely and gently begin to write your own stories. Of course, writing them is not all we're doing. We need to process them, and we really do need to know how to manage our emotions, how to allow our emotions. And again, that's something that we need to be taught. So grab your journal guide, write your stories safely, and make them transformational instead of things that are holding you back. Thanks for popping in. Be sure to come back next time so I can keep your head on straight. Sending you buckets of love.